I was escorting a fallen soldier when airport staff stopped me. What happened next moved everyone. Welcome back with a new real shock story. Before we start, comment and tell me which city you're watching from. At the end, don't forget to subscribe and rate it from 0 to 10. Let's enjoy the story, everyone. I still remember that morning like it was carved into my bones. I was up the airport waiting, standing by gate 7. My bag was heavy, but my heart was heavier. I wasn't there for a trip or to see someone off. I was there for something I didn't think I'd ever have to witness in real life. Something that would haunt me forever. I was there to see the final journey of a soldier, not just any soldier. Lieutenant James Carter. James wasn't famous. No headlines. No parades. Just a man who gave everything quietly. I had met him once, years before, when my father told me about a soldier who saved his unit during a mission overseas. James was the kind of man who carried honor in his silence. And now, the man I had never known personally was being brought home, his coffin carried by his brothers in arms. The airport wasn't loud that day. But there was a strange kind of hush, like the air knew something heavy was happening. The hum of travelers faded under the weight of something else, grief and respect. The procession moved forward slowly. Every step was deliberate, every movement measured. The coffin was covered in a flag, neat and still, and I could almost feel the weight of it in my chest. I was close enough to see the faces of the escorting soldiers. Their faces were unreadable, but I could see something deep in their eyes, pride mixed with sorrow. Behind them, family members walked with slow steps, clutching one another. There were no words, only silent tears. Then something strange happened. The procession slowed. I didn't understand at first, but then I saw it. A uniformed airport staff member stepped directly in front of them, his posture firm, almost defiant. He didn't speak at first. He just stood there. People began to whisper. I felt a chill creep over me. It wasn't just confusion. It felt like tension was building in the air. The escort commander stepped forward, speaking quietly but firmly. I couldn't hear everything, but I caught the words. We have orders to proceed. The staff member shook his head. Not without clearance. That word hit me like a punch to the chest. Clearance. For this moment, for this man's final journey. It made no sense. They stopped completely. The coffin stopped. The silence became heavier. I glanced around. Travelers paused. Phones came out. Cameras clicked quietly, capturing the moment. There was a hush that felt unnatural. Somewhere nearby, I heard a child cry. A woman's hand clutched her son's shoulder tighter. The air felt thicker. The escort commander spoke again, his voice firm now. This is a matter of protocol. But the man who stopped them spoke back softly, almost too quietly to hear, but his words rang louder than anything else. It's more than protocol. That phrase stayed in my mind like an echo. More than protocol. I felt my stomach tighten. Something was wrong, and I knew that whatever was about to happen was bigger than any rule or regulation. The staff member stepped closer. His hand raised slightly as if to block the coffin. That motion felt like a line being drawn. The silence in the corridor turned sharp. People stopped walking. Phones hovered in the air, filming. The moment felt suspended in time, and then the words came. The escort commander's voice, low but strong, "You have no right." Those words felt like a spark. They cracked the quiet. The staff member didn't reply. The family behind the coffin froze. Whispers grew louder. The tension in the air became almost unbearable. It was no longer just a stop. It was a challenge. Something invisible had been broken. Something sacred. I could feel the crowd around us holding their breath. I could see soldiers behind the coffin tighten their grips. The procession stood still in the middle of the terminal. And I realized I was watching something that wasn't supposed to happen. A soldier's last journey stopped, interrupted, questioned. No one moved. No one spoke. The silence became a storm. And in that moment, I knew this was not going to end quietly. Not for James Carter, not for his family, and not for everyone who was standing there watching. This wasn't about a coffin anymore. This was about something much deeper, something that I couldn't yet name but would never forget. And in that silence, everything changed. The air felt heavy, like it was holding its breath with us. I could see faces around me, strangers I'd never met, frozen in shock, some with tears, some with phones raised, others just staring. The staff members stood like a wall in front of James Carter's coffin. He wasn't moving. Neither was the commander. And behind them, the family. They stood there, like they were trying to hold themselves together while the world crumbled around them. I stepped closer, almost without thinking. My bag was swinging against my side, but I barely noticed. All I could see was the coffin, still under the flag, still in the middle of the terminal, like it was caught in some strange battle it had never signed up for. My heart kept beating faster. It felt wrong. This wasn't just an airport dispute, it felt like something much bigger. I found myself remembering what my grandmother once told me, that respect wasn't given, it was fought for. And in that moment, I realized we were all witnesses to something being fought for right here. No one spoke for a long time. It was as if even sound had been silenced by the weight of what was happening. Then, quietly, someone in the crowd whispered, "Why stop them?" The question spread like wildfire. Why stop them? People began murmuring. Some looked toward the staff member, others toward the commander. Everyone wanted an answer. But no answer came. The escort commander stepped closer to the staff member. His voice was low, but I could hear the strain. This is about respect. This is about honor. This is his last journey. His words hit something deep inside me. I could feel the grief in them, not just for James, but for what was being denied in that moment. The staff member looked at him, eyes narrowed, and said, "Clearance first." Then he turned slightly, as if signaling someone behind him. That shift made the air feel heavier still. I looked around and noticed people pulling out their phones, not just filming, but whispering into them, sharing what they were seeing. This was no longer just an isolated moment. It was becoming a story. I found myself stepping closer again. I didn't know why. Maybe because I couldn't stand still while this was happening. Maybe because I felt like if I moved, maybe I could change what was unfolding. The closer I got, the clearer I could hear the sounds. The muffled sobs, the clicking of cameras, the shuffle of feet. Then something happened that broke the silence completely. A voice, low, trembling, came from behind the coffin. "This is wrong. You can't do this." I turned quickly, trying to see who it was. It was one of the soldiers escorting the coffin. His voice cracked, but there was something unshakable in it. The staff member didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked past them, toward the growing crowd. He could see the cameras. He could feel the attention, and I swear, in that moment, he seemed to hesitate. But then he stepped closer, raising his hand again, not just to stop them, but to make a statement. His gesture was deliberate, defiant, and I felt my chest tighten because I knew this wasn't just about procedure anymore. This was about a choice, and the crowd around us began to shift. Some people stepped forward, others stepped back. You could feel tension breaking into action. Phones were recording, voices rising. Some began shouting in anger, others whispered prayers. It felt like the entire terminal was holding its breath, waiting for something to break. I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was a stranger, a woman standing nearby. She whispered, "It's not right." And I nodded, though I barely knew her, because I knew she was right. In that moment, it wasn't just James Carter's coffin that was stopped. It was respect. It was dignity. It was the kind of silence that people carry inside them for years, and no one knew what would happen next. The escort commander's voice rose again. "We are not turning back. This is his right." There was steel in his tone now, and I realized this wasn't a negotiation anymore. This was a stand. The staff member didn't answer. Instead, he stepped sideways, still blocking them. The tension in the air was thick enough to choke on. People were whispering, some filming, some crying quietly. The entire airport felt suspended in that moment, like it was holding on to something fragile. I remember thinking then this moment would never leave me. It was no longer just about James Carter. It was about all of us. About what we allow. About how far we are willing to go to honor those who gave everything. And then, as if on cue, someone in the crowd shouted, loud enough for everyone to hear, "This is wrong!" That shout broke something open. Suddenly, people around us started talking louder. Some arguing, some crying, some urging them to move forward. The noise became a roar, but the procession didn't move. The coffin stayed still. And in that silence after the chaos, I realized something terrifying. This wasn't just a delay. This was a moment that would not be forgotten, and whatever happened next, it would change everything. The crowd felt alive, now buzzing, shifting, breathing like one living thing. But somehow, in the middle of it all, I felt frozen. My legs felt heavy, as if the floor itself was holding me in place. I couldn't take my eyes off the coffin. It sat there, draped in that flag, silent but somehow screaming. I remember the way my chest tightened. My throat felt dry, but my heart beat so loud it was almost deafening. I could hear the murmurs now, questions thrown into the air like stones. Why is this happening? Is this legal? How can they stop them? I didn't know the answers. But I could feel something deep inside me saying that we were standing on the edge of something important. Something bigger than just this moment. And then I noticed James Carter's brother. He had been standing quietly, almost invisible at first, but now he stepped forward, his face pale, his eyes wet. He reached out, touching the coffin gently, almost reverently. There was no sound, just the shuffle of boots, the hum of anxious voices. But his touch, it broke something inside me. I could feel the grief in him, raw and unfiltered. The commander stepped forward again, his voice steady but heavy with emotion. "We have the clearance. This is his right." His words were sharp, but they were also pleading. The staff member shook his head, firm, unyielding. There was no answer, only the sound of breathing, hundreds of breaths, all drawn in tight, all waiting. Suddenly, someone in the crowd began chanting softly, "Let him pass, let him pass." It started small, almost a whisper, but it spread. Others joined. The words rolled through the terminal like a wave. "Let him pass, let him pass." It was hypnotic, almost desperate. And somehow it felt like hope. I stepped closer again. I couldn't stop myself. I wanted to really see what was happening. My hand reached for my phone, but I didn't record. I wanted this moment to live in my memory, not just as a clip. I wanted to feel it in my bones. The staff member looked at the chanting crowd, then at the commander, then at the coffin. His jaw tightened. His stance shifted. For a second, I thought he might move aside, but then he shook his head, firmly, determinedly, and my stomach sank. That's when things began to shift fast. Voices rose. Phones recorded. Strangers began stepping forward, pressing closer to the line. The air was thick now, not just with tension, but with emotion. People weren't just watching anymore, they were part of it. Part of this fight for respect, whether they understood it completely or not. And then, without warning, the staff member moved. Not forward, not backward, just a slight shift, enough to make everyone lean in. The commander stepped closer, raising his hand again, his voice rising louder now. "This is not just about procedure. This is about humanity." His words struck something deep inside me. I could feel the echo in the crowd. I saw people whispering to each other. I saw tears. I saw anger. I saw something raw and unfiltered that I couldn't explain. Something primal. And then someone I didn't recognize shouted, "Do it! Honor him!" The words echoed. And suddenly the air felt like it could crack. The chanting became louder. The crowd pressed in. Somewhere behind me, I heard the click of a phone recording the whole scene. And then, with a breath that felt like it belonged to everyone there, the commander stepped forward again. But before he could move the coffin, the staff member blocked him. Full stop. His eyes were locked on the commander's, and there was no giving in. I could see every muscle in his face tighten. Every movement was deliberate. And then, quietly, almost too quietly to hear, he said, "Not today." A hush fell over the crowd. It was the kind of silence that follows something shocking, something irreversible. Everyone stopped moving. I stopped breathing for a moment, and then, chaos, shouts, whispers, phones recording, people rushing forward, the sound of footsteps, the shuffling of boots. I felt the air around me vibrate with tension. Something was breaking. Something was about to change. And in that moment, as I stood there watching it all unfold, I realized I wasn't just witnessing a standoff anymore. I was living it. It was no longer about James Carter alone. It was about every person who had ever been told their grief didn't matter. It was about every story that had been silenced. And somewhere deep in my chest, I felt a voice whisper, "This moment is not over." Because I knew whatever happened, next it would be remembered. Not just by me, not just by those here, but by everyone who heard this story. And I didn't know how it would end. But I knew it was far from over. The air was thick now, not just with tension, but with something heavier. Something I couldn't name. Fear? Defiance? Sorrow? It was all of them wrapped into one living, breathing moment. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears as I stepped closer to the scene. My shoes clicked softly against the cold floor, but somehow it sounded loud in that charged silence. The crowd wasn't just watching anymore. It was part of this moment. Every face turned toward the coffin, toward the struggle unfolding. And I could feel it. This wasn't just about a soldier being escorted. This was about respect, about dignity, about the right to grieve without being stalked. The commander took a breath. His shoulders rose and fell with the weight of what he was about to do. "We move now," he said, his voice steady but heavy. Every word carried purpose. But the staff member didn't move. He stood his ground like a rock in a storm. His eyes locked with the commander's, unwavering. And that look, it burned into me. Then, chaos erupted. People began shouting, some calling for respect, others demanding answers. Phones lit up everywhere, recording, capturing every second. I could hear my own voice in my head, whispering, "This is it. This is the moment everything changes." The commander stepped forward again, but the staff member raised his hand, not aggressively, but with a quiet, firm conviction that silenced everyone. "No," he said, just one word. But it rang through the terminal like a bell tolling for something sacred. The coffin didn't move. Silence filled the air, heavy and thick. The chanting from before had stopped. The crowd waited. We were holding our collective breath. I felt my own breath catch in my chest, and suddenly my knees felt weak. Then the shouting started again, this time louder. "Let him pass," someone cried. Another voice joined, "Respect him." It spread like wildfire. The voices grew louder, more urgent. I could see people pushing closer to the line, forming a wall of humanity around the coffin. And then something happened I wasn't expecting. A man, no, a woman stepped forward. She wasn't part of the crowd before, but now she was in the middle of it. Her hands were trembling. Her voice cracked as she said, "This is wrong. Let him go." It wasn't just a plea, it was a challenge. Suddenly, the tension snapped. The terminal erupted into noise voices, shouting, footsteps moving fast, phones recording. The staff member stepped back, just enough for the commander to move forward. But then, a hand shot out, touching the coffin. Gentle, reverent. And the crowd fell silent again, as if they knew something sacred had just happened. I could feel tears burning behind my eyes. My chest ached. Not just for what was happening here, but for what it represented. Years of stories, of voices silenced. And now it was all here in one moment. One standoff in an airport terminal. The commander took another breath. "This isn't over," he said, and I could hear the weight of his words. They weren't just for the staff member, they were for everyone watching, everyone standing there holding their breath. For me, for all of us. And then, suddenly, it happened. The staff member stepped aside. Slowly, his shoulders sagging, his face unreadable. The coffin began to move. Just inches at first. Then more. The sound of wheels rolling softly over the floor filled the space. The air shifted. The crowd moved closer, pressing in. Phones raised to record. I could see tears on faces I didn't know. I could hear sobs. I could feel the weight of something profound pressing down on us all. And then, before I could even process it, the coffin was gone, pulled forward through the crowd, carried past a wall of watching faces, and just like that, the moment ended. But the feeling didn't. It lingered in my chest like a wound, like something unfinished. I turned and looked at the faces around me. Some angry, some crying, some in silent shock. And I realized something terrifying. This wasn't the end. This was only the turning point. Because whatever happened next, it wouldn't just be about that coffin anymore. It would be about every single story that had been silenced, every grief that had been ignored, every injustice that had been swept aside. And deep in my chest, I knew this moment was far from over. The moment the coffin disappeared through the gate, the air felt different. It was quieter now, but heavier, like the sound of something breaking that you can't repair. I stood frozen where I was, watching people disperse slowly, some whispering, others shaking their heads. But I didn't move. I couldn't. My body was rooted there, my mind still trapped in what had just happened. I kept replaying it in my head, the look in that staff member's eyes, the silence before he finally stepped aside, the way the crowd shifted, as if they had all been holding their breath for something important. And they had. We had. But for what? Was it respect? Was it defiance? Or was it something deeper, a reminder that some battles aren't fought with weapons but with human courage? I felt tears sliding down my cheeks, unbidden. I wasn't even sure why. It wasn't just grief. It was anger. It was sorrow. It was the weight of knowing this wasn't the first time something like this happened. And it wouldn't be the last. Somewhere deep inside, I felt the story still pulsing, unfinished. When I left the terminal, the noise of the airport felt strange. The chatter, the footsteps, the rolling of suitcases, it all seemed distant. Like I was somewhere else entirely. People walked past me, immersed in their own worlds, unaware of what had just unfolded. And I wondered how many of them even noticed. How many of them cared. That night, I lay in bed replaying the entire moment in my mind. The silence, the shouting, the courage, the grief. I realized something. I was still holding my breath for the moment when justice would feel complete. But the truth is, it never feels complete. Not until every voice is heard. Not until every story like this is told. Not until we stop letting dignity be something that has to be fought for. This isn't just one story. It's not just my story. It's the story of thousands, millions who stand at checkpoints, in courts, in streets, in airports, facing the same moment where they have to fight simply to be seen as human. And most of the time, their courage is swallowed by silence. I want people to remember this moment, not just as an incident in an airport, but as a symbol. A reminder that dignity is fragile, and that respect can be taken away in seconds. But that courage, the courage to stand, to speak, to refuse to move, can change everything. The question I keep asking myself is this: how many more times will it take before the world truly listens? How many moments like this will pass before we stand together to stop them? Before we make sure no one else has to fight for the right to mourn in peace? I don't have the answer. But I know one thing. This moment will stay with me forever. It has changed me. It has shaken something deep inside me, something that will never go away. And maybe that's the point. Maybe the power of this moment isn't just in what happened in that terminal. Maybe it's in how it makes us feel afterwards, how it forces us to question who we are, what we value, and what we are willing to stand for. I still hear the echoes of that silence. I still see the faces in that crowd, the hand on the coffin, the defiance in a single word, no. And I keep wondering, if you had been there, would you have stood as they did? Because standing still in the face of injustice, that takes a kind of courage that doesn't come easy. But maybe, just maybe, it's the kind of courage the world needs right now. And I'm not sure I'll ever forget that day. Not ever.